Okay, now I bet there's audio. Yeah, now there's audio. Okay, again, what's a false report? Okay, reporting something that's not true. What else? Against somebody. That's basically lying on somebody, gossiping on somebody, spreading rumors about somebody that's, that they may not be true. You just hear something, and we a lot of people tend to do that. They hear something and say, "Well, did you hear about what so and so did?" And then you go, "No, I didn't hear. Tell me." They tell you, and you go, and you run off and telling everybody else. Well, it turns out so and so didn't do that, but you've been running around spreading all these gossiping and spreading all these rumors about somebody. Okay. So the only way to obey this command that they're talking about, not to do the false witness, is to put a stop to a false report. Okay? Doing nothing or remaining neutral is to allow, I didn't get that in there, right? Is to allow the false report to circulate. Okay? So you hear a false report on somebody that you know is wrong. Okay? And for you to just go, well, I'm not going to get involved. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Instead of going up and saying, no, wait a minute. I was there. I know what was going on. This is what happened. If you just allow it to circulate, then you're wrong to do that. Okay? And since the issue was a false report, it was proper to ask and require proof from the person bringing the report. Okay? Show me. Let me see. Bring me proof on this. And proof is required in the Bible from 2 or 3 witnesses. See that in Deuteronomy 19:15. As we go along, we'll see that later on. Okay? But it's always been in the nature of man to follow a crowd to do evil. Okay? We're seeing it right now with the riots and everything in Los Angeles and Chicago and all those areas like that. All it takes is a few people to go out there and start stirring things up, and everybody will join in, just for the sake of joining in. Those people aren't out there trying to bring a change to anything. All they're wanting to do is just go and destroy things. That's all they're wanting to do. But that's what is in man, is that they just want to follow the crowd. What is the crowd doing? Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. Right. And it's these people do these things, and they're doing it just because they can. That's all they want to do. They're like I said, they're not trying to reform anything or change anything. They're just going out there to tear things up, throw Molotov cocktails at police cars, loot stores, and all this other stuff. That's all. That's the only reason they're there. To ask them what they're even protesting about, half of them probably couldn't tell you what they were protesting about. Yeah, they're there to show out is what they're doing. But it has always been in man's nature, and it's been that way since Adam followed Eve into sin. Okay? And it's easy and dangerous to follow the crowd to pervert justice. Okay? To follow with our peers, the people around us, and just going with the popular opinion that's out there. You'll have to excuse me. My head's a little cloudy. I had to take some Benadryl before I came here, so it just my train of thought it derails every once in a while. So, but it's just popular opinion, and it's not that it's right. It's just that's what the popular opinion is. That's why if you're seeing lately, just since the first of the year, you see a lot of this alphabet people are starting to fall away now. You're not hearing as much about them. Yeah, I know. Van Buren had a parade, and they shouldn't have been, but when you do something that promotes a false report or perverts justice, then it is sin to do that. Okay? That's why it's so important, so very important, for us to choose our crowd carefully. Choose your friends, choose who you hang around with, choose them very carefully. Okay? You can't choose your family, but you can certainly choose your friends. All right? So make sure you choose your friends wisely. And if you're hanging around with a bunch of friends or have a bunch of acquaintances or people that you hang around with sometimes that are doing stuff because they're just going with the flow of what everybody else is doing, don't hang around them. Cut off contact with them. Yeah. Yeah. Now, also in this, no partiality was to be shown to a poor man. In other words, just because you're poor didn't give you the excuse to do anything. Okay? The poor were not favored just because they were poor. And that's what a lot of politicians are trying to do today. Oh, those people that are looting all these things and doing all that stuff, they're just poor. They're stealing growth. No, they're not. They're breaking into shoe stores and stealing Nikes. That's not going to help them eat. Okay? So the law here is saying just because you're poor, it's not giving you an advantage. And you're not to be favored just because you're poor, any more than the rich are to be favored because they're rich. Okay? The facts of the case and the principles of justice should decide the dispute, not the high or low standing that is perceived or the victim status of those involved. And I have even noticed lately a big decline in all of this professional victims, to where everybody's always saying, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim. You know, that oh, I deserve this because I'm a victim. I'm seeing that because now we're getting some actual politicians in there that are saying, no, we're not going to put up with this anymore. You know, the law's the law. Here's how it is. And no one is above the law. All right. Verses 4 through 9. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him. If thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Thou shalt not rest the judgment of thy poor in his cause. Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent and righteous slay thou not, for I will not justify the wicked. And thou shalt take no gift For the gift blindeth the wise, and perverteth the words of the righteous. And thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Okay? Now this command for them to do good to your enemy, which is basically what they're saying. If you see somebody that you don't like, and you see that their animal is roaming free, don't just say, no, oh well, too bad for them. No, you're supposed to help them go get that animal. But this command to do good to your enemy was important because it showed that goodness and kindness in Israel was not only required for those that you liked and you loved, but to everyone, to all people, whether you liked them or not. Okay? You probably don't need this command to do this for a friend. If you see your friend's animal or something like that that's running astray, you're going to call your friend and say, hey, let's get this thing taken care of. Right? So you don't need the command to do it for your friend. But it was necessary for the enemy and for someone who hates you. So they're saying, it don't matter if you don't like this person or this person doesn't like you. You still do the same to them as you would for your friend. Huh? You kill them with kindness. The principle is clear. How you feel about someone does not determine right and wrong behavior towards them. Whether you like them, don't like them, whatever it is, it does not determine your behavior towards that person. Okay? There are principles of justice that may be observed above our feelings, above how we feel about things. And God knew that it was always easy for the poor to be neglected in the administration of justice. It's the same thing today. Okay? If you're a poor person, you're going to get a public defender who has probably 300 or 400 or 500 cases that he's trying to juggle around, and you're going to get the short end of the stick. But if if you've got money and you can afford a lawyer, but being poor did not make one right in a legal dispute simply because they were poor. Okay? But it should never keep them from receiving a fair hearing and justice on it. The promotion of truth is essential. It was essential and it is essential under God's law. God knew how much evil and injustice is justified among men by lies. So you can justify, these people can justify things to other people simply by lying about it. If you tell a lie loud enough and long enough, eventually people will start to believe it. Okay? And you know where that came from? Nazi Germany. that was their propaganda plan. Just tell the lie long enough, and tell it loud enough, and eventually people will just start to believe it. Okay? So, God emphasized truth-telling in Israel's daily life and legal practices. Okay? The command not to kill the innocent and righteous not only spoke to the need to protect life in the womb, but also that there are instances where justice requires the death of the guilty and the wicked. We talked about this a little bit last week. Okay? They went through, God went through and Moses gave them certain instances where the death penalty, there were capital offenses, that you were to put another person to death because of it. Is it legally sanctioned? Well, it's legally sanctioned homicide. Somebody who's executed, actually on their death certificate, is listed as a homicide. Okay? But there are just some people that are too evil to be in society. And locking them up for the rest of their life cost. They try to say it's cheaper to keep them locked, but it's not. But anyway, in the promotion of justice, God also commanded against bribery. No bribing. Specifically, he commanded against the taking of a bribe. Right? Bribe makers, people who are bribing people, bribe makers, can't exist without the bribe takers. Okay? You can't bribe somebody if somebody's not willing to be bribed. So if you cut out all the bribe takers, then you can't have bribe makers. Right? God commanded Israel to show kindness and fairness towards those who they might not be kind towards by nature. We see this it's an example in with Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. Okay. This was an individual that was hurt and beaten on the side of the road, but people were walking by him because he was considered of a lower class. But the Good Samaritan took care of him. And that's what the law is telling them. Okay? In later times, some rabbis taught that there was, now this is something really weird though, that some rabbis taught that there was an obligation or at least a permission to hate your enemies. So the rabbis would teach that it's okay to hate your enemy. As a matter of fact, you're obligated to hate your enemy. That's what this is what the rabbis were teaching back then. But here we see that fairness and kindness are commanded, even to the ones who hate you. All right, verses 10 to 13. And 6 years thou shalt sow thy land and gather in the fruits thereof. But the 7th year thou shalt let it rest and lie still, that the poor of thy people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field shall eat. In like manner thou shalt deal with thy vineyard and with thy olive yard. 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the 7th day thou shalt rest, that thine ox and thine ass may rest, and the son of thy handmaid and the stranger may be refreshed. And in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth. So, the idea and the principle of the Sabbath applied more than just the work week. It also applied to years. There were Sabbath years. Okay? The land was to rest. It was given a chance to rest 1 year out of 7. Okay? There are also, what's really interesting about Jewish custom is the idea of the sevens, the Sabbaths. Because the 7th day, you're supposed to rest. Okay? That's the Sabbath. You're supposed to take that day to rest. The fields, for 7 years, you're supposed to give them a 1 year rest on that. But then there is also 7 Sabbaths that people who are in debt, things like that, or who have lost something to someone else, every 50 years, the 50th year, after the 49 years, the Sabbaths that were there, okay? After this 49 years, on the 50th year, anybody know what that was called? No? Jubilee, the year of Jubilee. Anybody know what happened on the year of Jubilee? Huh? You got everything back. Okay? So every 50 years, you got everything back. So there was this concept goes on and on and on throughout all of it. And by tradition, some in Israel accomplished this by only cultivating 6/7 of their land at any given time. So instead of plowing and planting the whole field, they would only plow 6/7 of it and practice a method of crop rotation. Now, anybody that's ever known a farmer knows about crop rotation because certain crops take up certain minerals out of the fields, out of the soil that you're planting in. So you have to let that get back. You have to let it build back up again. So instead of planting something that's going to take all the potassium out of this one, then you transfer it to this field over here, and you either let this field rest or you plant something that is going to replenish what was taken away. Okay? So it was crop rotation. And one reason God commanded the Sabbath year was to give the poor something to eat. They were allowed to harvest and process that which grew unplanted from the unused ground. Now, as you all know, anybody who's ever planted a garden knows that if you leave it alone, that sometimes the following year, even though you haven't planted anything there, you had tomatoes one year, and the next year you didn't plant tomatoes, and then all of a sudden you look down and, wow, there's a tomato plant there. How did that tomato plant get there? I didn't plant that tomato plant. Okay? Sometimes they would come back. They would grow on that. And the poor were allowed to go and take that which was grown that wasn't planted, which was grown, and they were used it, and they took it and processed it and used it for themselves. So this was a way to help the poor that demonstrated both that the landowners hold themselves back for maximum profit and that the poor work to help themselves. In other words, the farmer didn't go out and harvest the stuff that was there and give it to the poor. The poor wanted it. They had to go get it. Okay? The principle of Sabbath rest was intended for all of the people. But not just the people. It was also intended for the animals as well. So you were supposed to give your animals a day of rest too. Okay? And that the poor... Okay. All right, the principle of the Sabbath rest was intended for all the people, and the Sabbath was to be dedicated to the Lord. All right? And not given to any false gods. In other words, on the Sabbath, you were supposed to think strictly about the Lord. You say, well, we don't do that now. We think about the Lord. Well, no, we don't always. We put other gods before us, even on the Sabbath. Hey, what about instead of going to church, you go to the lake? Is that putting something else, putting another god before the Lord? Sure. Okay. Especially if you do it on a regular basis. You know, for once on a vacation or something like that, okay, that's something. But, you know, a lot of people, they do it all the time. And that's putting a false idol in front of the Lord. All right, verses 14 to 17. 3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in a year. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee, in the time of appointed of the month Abib. For in it thou camest out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of thy labor, which thou hast sown in the fields, and the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, when thou hast gathered in thy labors out of the field. 3 times in the year all thy males shall appear before the Lord God. So there were 3 main feasts that God implemented and said, these are mandatory. These are not These are not optional. These are basically like mandatory holidays that you have to take. Okay? 3 times a year. And all the men of Israel had to come together to keep these important feasts. They included the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is connected to Passover. Because if you remember, the unleavened bread, they had to get all the leaven out of the house, and they had to eat unleavened bread. Then there was the Feast of the First Fruits and the Ingathering, and both of these are associated to Pentecost. Details regarding the observance of these feasts are going to be given later on in Leviticus as we get into that. So you have the Mosaic law. If you'll understand, when we hear people, when scholars talking about the law, you have to understand which law they're talking about. Okay? Because not only is there the criminal law, there's also the civil law and the ceremonial law. Okay? Those are 3 laws that are there. But then you also have to look at, are we looking at the Mosaic law or the Levitical law? Because the Mosaic law was pretty basic. The Levitical law, when we get into Leviticus, you're going to see is much more in depth, much more detailed. So when you're speaking of something, well, the law, okay, which law? Which law are you talking about? The law of the land. Well, it's which is really interesting, especially when you think that it is, especially when we're talking about Jesus. Okay? Because Jesus came, he said, to what? Fulfill the law. Which one? Which law are you fulfilling here? Okay? You know, so are we looking at the Mosaic law, the Levitical law? Are we looking at the criminal statutes, the civil statutes? The criminal would be the moral statutes and all that as well. Or we're looking at the ceremonial statutes. Primarily, Jesus fulfilled all the ceremonial laws. So we no longer have to go to the temple. We no longer have to sacrifice animals, those type of things. Okay? The moral law, which they looked at as the criminal law, but the moral law is still very much in effect. Jesus didn't do away with the moral law because he said he fulfilled the law. The moral law is still there. So we still have to follow the moral law. Okay? All right. Verses 18 and 19. Thou shalt not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, neither shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until the morning. The first of the firstfruits of thy land shalt thou bring into the house of the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. Now, look at the first fruits, the first of the first fruits. Here's what a lot of people do. This is basically, we're looking at the same kind of principle that goes along with tithing. Okay? You give the first of the first fruits. Here's some controversy with that some people have. Do you pay tithes on net or gross? Okay? Before taxes come out. Yeah. Okay. And what I hear a lot of people say, well, I pay it on net after the tax has already been taken out, and then when I get my tax refund at the end of the year, I'll pay tithes on it too. Okay? No, that's not the way it works. Right? You pay taxes on the whole thing. And then if you get any money back, you pay taxes on that, or just donate it to the church. It'll be fine. Just do that. Okay. All right, since leaven was a symbol of sin and corruption, atoning blood could never be offered with leavened bread. A lot of times in these sacrifices that were made, they were allowed to consume the animal that they sacrificed. But nowhere, if there was atoning blood in it, it was used for an atonement, then you could not eat that with leavened bread. because leavened bread is a symbol of sin. Okay? If atonement was to be regarded as a complete work, it must be wholly offered unto the Lord. Everything had to be given to God. Not a small portion of it was reserved until later. So you couldn't save it until another time. The fat, you couldn't save the fat on it for another time. Right? This especially included the fat of the sacrifice, the best portion of the sacrificed animal. Now, when I get a nice steak on that, you look at the marbling in a steak. You want to see good marbling in your steak and everything like that. What's that marbling? Yeah, but what is it? What is the marbling in? It's fat. Yeah, the flavor's in the fat. The meat itself, not so much. The fat is what gives it the flavor. Okay? Now, when Israel came into Canaan, they had a special responsibility to make a first fruit offering to God. In addition to their regular first fruit offering, giving God the first and the best. You don't, going back to tithes again, okay? You don't pay your tithes after the bills are paid. Tithes get paid first, then the bills get paid. Okay? Because people will say, "Oh, well, I'll pay my tithes with if I have any left over after I pay my bills, I'll pay my tithes." Yeah, if you keep doing that, then you're never going to get caught up. You pay your tithes first, you're going to find out that it's going to be a whole lot easier to keep your bills paid that way. Giving God the first and the best honored him as the good provider of all things. Now, it says, "Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk." What does that mean? It's a strange sounding command, isn't it? Eh? When they say seethe it, they mean that you're not to cook or boil the kid in its mother's milk. This was a pagan fertility ritual that they did back in those days. So they were commanded not to do that because they weren't so they wouldn't imitate that. But because of some very strange rabbinical interpretations, today this command is the reason why an observant Jew, now get this, cannot eat a kosher cheeseburger. As a matter of fact, an observant Jew can't even eat a cheeseburger. There's no such thing as a kosher cheeseburger. You may have kosher meat, you may have kosher cheese, but to put the two of them together, it's not kosher. Okay? Today's observant Jew will not eat milk and meat, misspelled that, milk and meat at the same meal. It says mild, I know, but it's milk. They won't eat milk and meat at the same meal. A lot of times people will sit down and they'll eat dinner and they'll have a nice cup of milk to go with it. Jews won't do that. Observant Jews, Orthodox Jews, will not drink milk during the meal. Okay? Because the rabbis insist that the meat in the hamburger may have come from the calf of the cow that gave the milk for the cheese. All right? So, in other words, they can eat a hamburger, but not a cheeseburger. Mm-hmm. You can't put meat and dairy together on it. I don't know. Yeah, with fish. Hmm. But yeah, they gave the milk. They just wouldn't do it because they were afraid that the calf that you got the meat from might have nursed on the cow that made the cheese. So it's weird. And they say, and the cheese and the meat would seethe means to boil, and the cheese and the meat would boil together in one stomach. So, it is that it would all churn together at the same, and so, heat up in there and all that. So anyway, and it would be a violation of this command. The law also speaks of rejecting partnership between a mother and the death of her offspring. All right, let's look at verses 20 and 21. Behold, I sent an angel before thee to keep thee in the way, and to keep thee into the place which I have prepared. Beware of him and obey his voice. Provoke him not, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. Okay? This unique angel commanded obedience from Israel. And this angel had the right of judgment over the nation of Israel. And most of all, the name of God was in the angel. Now, we know very few angels by name. As a matter of fact, we really only know of 2 angels that were actually in our scriptures that are called by name. Okay? 2 of them, y'all know who they are? Gabriel, Michael and Gabriel. And in a sense, Michael and Gabriel have the name of God in their name. Some of you are looking at me like, huh? Okay. Michael, Gabriel, both end with L. In Hebrew, El means Lord. El Shaddai. Those. So they both have the name of God in their name. But neither Michael nor Gabriel commanded this kind of obedience from Israel. Because they didn't. Because I know everything. Between me and my brother, we know everything in the world. Ask me a question. Go ahead. Ask me any question. Yeah. Command they did not command. We don't see anywhere in the Bible where it says that Michael or Gabriel commanded this kind of obedience from Israel. Or presumed to sit in judgment over Israel. Michael and Gabriel would not, they didn't presume to sit in judgment over Israel. So, who could this angel be? Huh? Raphael? Huh? This is the specific angel of the Lord. Who is the angel of the Lord? Jesus, yeah. Jesus appearing in Old Testament, before his incarnation in Bethlehem, who often speaks directly to the Lord. And of course, the name Yahweh is in Jesus. His name is literally Yeshua. So his name, the Lord's name, is in his name. So the angel that they're speaking here is not really an angel at all. They call him the angel of the Lord, but it is the pre-incarnate Jesus is who it is. Jesus was with Israel in all their wilderness experiences. And the angel would go before them into the place which God had prepared. The same principle is true of our life with Jesus today. Okay? Not only is it true that Jesus goes before us to prepare a place for us in heaven, but he also is in the place that we walk today. And that place where we walk today was prepared by God. Where we walk tomorrow is prepared by him as well. Right? So everywhere we go, everything that we do, the way has been prepared by Jesus already. All right, verses 22 to 26. But if thou shalt indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy unto thine enemies and an adversary unto thine adversaries. For mine angel shall go before thee and bring thee in unto the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. Thou shalt not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do after their works, but thou shalt utterly overthrow them and quite break down their images. And ye shall serve the Lord your God, and he shall bless thy bread and thy water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of thee. There shall nothing cast their young, nor be barren in the land. The number of the days I will fulfill it. Now, it's characteristic of the old covenant, the old Mosaic covenant, that the blessing was based almost purely on Israel's performance. All right? If they obeyed, what happened? They were blessed, right? If they disobeyed, what happened? They were cursed. Yes. Now, under the new covenant, we operate on a different principle. Though there is an inevitable consequence for us for sin and God's loving correction for disobedience. We're blessed in Jesus, and not because we have been disobedient. God did not bring Israel out of Egypt to lead them alone in the wilderness. He didn't bring them that far to just let them go. His plan was to bring them into his land of promise and abundance. But there were mighty nations in Canaan. The Hittites and the Jebusites and all the other ites, a lot of ites there. But his angel would bring an obedient Israel into the promised land. The Canaanite people were deeply depraved and they were morally degraded. And this was a natural result of the depraved and degraded idol gods that they served. So, it was essential that Israel not imitate their idol worship in any way or allow it to continue. If they did reject the gods of the Canaanites and continued in faithfulness to God, he promised blessing their entire life. Okay? So it was a matter of obedience to him. As I said, Israel's blessings and curses were based on blessings, obedience, curses, disobedience. Okay? Now, God doesn't curse us, per se, if we're disobedient, but he will punish us for being disobedient in some way. All right, 27 to 30. I will send my fear before thee, and I will destroy all the people to whom thou shalt come. And I will make all thine enemies turn their backs unto thee. And I will send hornets before thee, which shall drive out the Hivite and the Canaanite and the Hittite from before thee. I will not drive them out from before thee in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field multiply against thee. But little and little I will drive them out from before thee until thou be increased and inherit the land. So God promised he's going to go before Israel into the land of Canaan for them, using both obviously supernatural methods, which we talked about, but also seemingly natural phenomenon as well. Sometimes I have a problem with this word supernatural because it's not really supernatural, because it's God's nature. So how can it be supernatural if it's God's nature? Yeah. Maybe supernatural to us, but to God it's just who he is. Right? And God promised to drive out the enemies of Israel from Canaan. But he would not drive them out all at once. He could, but he would not do that. He's not going to drive them out all at once. Israel may have wanted to have the land all cleared out before them. But God knew it was not best for the land or for them. It sometimes frustrates us that this is often the way God works in our lives as well. He clears out things little by little. Stumbling blocks, different things that we're going up against. He clears them out little by little. Although we might prefer he do it all at once, we would usually prefer that he do it all at once. But God wanted Israel to have increase in the process of taking the promised land. He wanted them to grow. God cares that we grow as well. A little at a time. So that we can grow as we go through. Okay? And so he often grows us, like you said, little by little. This was just one reason why it's better for God to defeat their enemies little by little. Doing it by what seemed to be the easy way. Clearing all of Israel's enemies at once had consequences Israel couldn't see and they couldn't appreciate them. Even though that would be the easiest way to do it and it would work, Israel's think that it would work better for them, but it wouldn't. That's why God says, I'm going to do it a little bit at a time. All right. 31 to 33. And I will set thy bounds from the Red Sea even unto the sea of the Philistines, and from the desert unto the river, for I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and thou shalt drive them out before thee. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. Thou shalt not dwell in thy land, lest they make thee sin against me. For if thou serve their gods, it will surely be a snare unto thee. This encompasses a huge portion of the land that Israel has never fully possessed. Now, many suppose that the closest they came was during the days of King David and King Solomon. Yet this was territory that at some points stretched all the way to the Euphrates River. There is a spiritual principle here as well. God may grant, but we must possess. God will grant it to it, but we still have to possess it. He withholds our possessions of many of our blessings until we partner with him in bold faith and obedience to receive them. We've been granted every spiritual blessing. Paul told it's in Colossians, I believe. Paul told the Colossians that we have inherited every spiritual blessing in heaven. Okay? But we will only possess what we will partner with him, with God, in faith and obedience to receive. If we don't partner with God in faith and obedience, we're not going to receive it. God is not an indulgent, spoiling father. And then say, oh, you want it? Okay. Anybody seen kids like that? They're at Walmart. Yeah, I want this. I want this. Okay, honey, you can have it. I want this too. Okay, you can have it. Okay? That's not the way God is. God says, if we say we want it, God says, okay, you're going to have to show me the obedience and respect and everything else, and then we'll go from there. So God isn't an indulgent, spoiling father pouring out on his children resources, blessings, and gifts that they're not ready to receive or to be responsible with. You would never, let's take for example the boys here, you would never go out and buy them a brand new Lamborghini that'll do 225 miles an hour. Okay? Because they haven't gotten to the point to where they're able to handle the responsibility of driving a Lamborghini. They'd be out there in the school parking lot cutting donuts and everything else. Right? When God's people are ready to possess in faith, what was a promise became or becomes realized. Okay? But through lack of discernment, Israel did end up making a covenant with some of the people in the land. There is no area of the law that Israel or anyone has ever kept perfectly. Nobody has ever kept the law perfectly, aside from Jesus. But nobody has ever kept the law perfectly. Nobody is sinless. We've all sinned. Okay? All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Okay? We're all sinners. Nobody. I had a guy tell me one time, he says, I haven't sinned since I got saved. I said, you just did. You lied through your teeth. Okay? Everybody sins. It's going to happen. It's human nature. Ever since Eve ate Adam out of house and home, it's been human nature. So, we sin. Okay? But God will forgive us and will give us the blessings. Okay? All right, that ends chapter 23. Beginning at chapter 24, where Moses actually signs the covenant with God next week. Okay? Any questions, comments, concerns, amens, omes?
Thank you for joining us today. We pray you were blessed by the broadcast. If you have a prayer request or questions about Solid Rock Tabernacle, please visit our website at www.solidrocktabernacle.org. That's www.solidrocktabernacle.org. On behalf of the pastors and congregation here at Solid Rock Tabernacle, we pray you have a blessed week, and we invite you to join us in person or on one of our future broadcasts.